Another Carnage House interview coming down the pipe. Today I got Tim Wilms with me, founder of Unshackled media production company, website, YouTube channel. Got Tim Wilms. Wilms Front is the YouTube series you've been doing recently. How you going?
Yeah, I'm going good, thanks, Dougal.
It's good to see you. You've had me and my brother on your channel before, and I thought it was time to introduce you to our viewers that we're slowly accumulating. And you really helped us out a lot, actually. So we want to, introduce you to the Carnage House family on our channel. The first thing I want to ask you is how you're doing in the home setup. You're not out of your normal studio, it seems, at this point. How are you handling that?
I've settled in quite well. I've got the custom home studio setup, which everyone seems to have, because even on the big networks, Sky News and ABC, they've got their home office in the background. So I've got my bookshelf there. I've got my flags there, and I'm not sure if you can see. I'll go the other way. You can see my photo of Austrian economists who, if they've all passed away now, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Murray Rothbard, Henry Hazlitt, but they'd be turning in their grave at the money that our government's printing and all the other Western governments to pay for their coronavirus containment measures.
Yeah, well, it is. Before I get into that economics discussion, I should say as well, I'm actually not in Sydney. That's why you see me in the kitchen, and right here you see the paper towel. I don't want to be disrespectful to the viewers, but I had to get out of Sydney, so that's why I'm broadcasting out of a kitchen. But it is what it is. We get up and we do the work. But I was reading Hayek's book, is The Road to Serfdom?
Yes.
And
that's on the shelf.
That's on the shelf. It's a good book, and it's interesting. He mentions, because I previously mentioned thought of Austrian economists as like totally for like free trade, as kind of like a very rigid kind of maybe Ayn Rand type of scenario, but they're not. They're not totally that. They're like saying where competition can govern behavior and the distribution of resources the best, then we should allow competition there. But total free trade is not always beneficial. What's your reading of the Austrian economist arguments?
Well, to take it right back to probably the most preeminent voice is Ludwig von Mises, and his magnus opus was human action. And as the name suggests, this study of economics is about analyzing human action. He called it praxology. And so it's deducing from human action how an economy works.
Mm.
And the reason why it has this wider reputation as defending free markets, voluntary interaction, is because that's how Ludwig von Mises, through deducing human action, found that the laws of economics worked.
Mm. Would you say that I would say I would kind of align myself with the Austrian economics, or more, kind of free trade, smaller government intervention than maybe conventional economic policy. But where do you say the strength of the Austrian economic school lies? Do you think it lies in like better economic growth? Do you think it lies in like the moral presuppositions of free trade?
I would say its biggest strength is because standard economics 101 that you're taught at university, it teaches you that it's a natural occurrence that we have these economic boom and bust, where Austrian economics, through its Austrian theory of the business cycle, says that no, this is not a natural occurrence. It's because we have central banking, inflation, we don't have a stable currency, and we have a system of fractional reserve banking where the house of cards of the banking system can collapse just like that.
What does fractional reserve banking actually mean? I've heard it a few times, but I don't know what it means.
So when you deposit money in the bank, the bank loans roughly, it's It's widely known that banks operate on 10% deposits. So when you deposit money in the bank, they loan 90% of that out, and then the person who gets that 90%, they're obviously going to bank that there, and it's a cycle there. And so the reason why it's called fractional reserve banking is if we all withdrew our money at once, the banking system would collapse because the banks have only got 10% of our money on hand, and which is why it hasn't happened during the coronavirus pandemic. It's called a bank run. People haven't withdrawn large sums from banks because I think they know that paper money, can transmit the virus, and so a lot of people are just going with FPOS, PayPass, or on their phone Touch ID pass. So that's why it's described as a house of cards, because if there's a panic, then it all collapses and the economy retracts.
Right. So does it mean that the economy is playing with kind of money we don't have? Is that the bottom line?
It's based on debt. It's an economy based on debt. Obviously, when the banks loan the reserves that they have, the other person's deposit, that's a loan, and then that person deposited the loan of that again. So we only have 10% of actual money. The rest of it, 90%, is all loaned out.
Right.
Mm.
And it's so when people tune in to to kind of reintroduce the Unshackled or Tim Wilms, I mean, you've got the economists there, you've got the two flags in the background. You definitely get a lot of political and social commentary. What do you think the Unshackled kind of stands for, or Tim Wilms stands for? Because I know you recently kind of differentiated the two a little bit with Wilms' front, but how do you see the Unshackled and yourself standing against all the other news outlets?
Well, I started the Unshackled in September 2016, basically in response. I've been politically active, engaged for a decade now. As I just explained, most adherents to Austrian economics I believe in the libertarian political philosophy, and I still consider myself a libertarian, even though some would like to, as the saying goes, tear up my libertarian card, even though libertarians shouldn't believe in licenses to be libertarian. But I started it in response to sort of the fracturing I was seeing in the not just the Australian libertarian movement, but globally because obviously Donald Trump, he at that time was just tearing the political establishment to pieces. He obviously it all started when he ran for president, and he was saying all those outrageous things about Mexican rapists and John McCain not being a war hero, blood coming out of Megyn Kelly's wherever. And when you're a libertarian, it's easily to get down in the dumps about how unfree the world is. But the real enemy is, it's partly what your channel is about, the deep state, the establishment. It's the system. That's the real enemy. And so when you have somebody like Donald Trump come along and just make them shit their pants, and there was the whole Stop Trump movement, I was just loving it because that's one way to get progress. If you have somebody who, Donald Trump is not a libertarian, but if you have somebody who's a disruptor, that helps break down the system, makes it easier for radical change in the future. I was in that camp, and then there are other libertarians who thought that Trump was going to bring in a fascist America. You know, the meme, he's literally Hitler. And so the Unshackled was born basically out of my frustration at those type of libertarians, because the past year I'd seen that there was a new threat to freedom, and they were those social justice warriors on campus. Because when I was growing up and at school in the 90s and early 2000s, we'd base we were basically taught during that time, if you can believe it. Sorry, I just noticed. Bit of a spot on my mouth there. You can leave that in if you want. But I even during my schooling during that time, before it was completely corrupted, the education system with cultural Marxism, that all of these social ills, racism, sexism, other forms of bigotry were things of the past. And we were living in the new postmodern liberal age. And you had these college kids that began, was 2015 at the University of Missouri, where they said, no, in fact, our society is horribly bigoted and prejudiced. It was, the exact quote comes from Anita Sarkeesian, who, and this shows just how crazy things were back then, is how sexist video games were. She used to do these critiques on how there were all these sexist references in games. Fremon's Frequency, that's the name of her channel. Not that I'm saying you should go out and check that out.
Hey, that's also one of the issues that kind of propelled Milo to become famous, was the game.
Yeah. The exact quote from Anita Sarkeesian is, "Everything's racist, everything's sexist, everything's homophobic." And I was sort of like, no, it's not. That's not what I see. I live.
No.
I live in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne, near Frankston and the Mornington Peninsula, what some people would call old Australia. And so obviously I'm not in the inner cities or in the burbs as it's known. I mean, basically what is still the last vestige of traditional Australia. And no, I didn't notice all of this, as it's called, was it subliminal racism, structures of prejudice. They came up with all a list of things. Systematic racism was another one, and of course intersectionality. That there were hierarchies of discrimination and privilege and oppression.
Mm. And you found that by Trump going in, that was like helped the libertarian cause. Because I remember I watched an interview with Peter Thiel, who's like originally was one of the guys along with Elon Musk who created PayPal and did a few other tech ventures. And now I think he's a big Republican donor, but fundamentally he's like a libertarian. And he was saying one of the reasons why he supported Donald Trump quite early, I think after Rand Paul got out of the race, was precisely because of his foreign policy rhetoric, and that the idea of not being involved in kind of the Middle East, for example, was kind of a libertarian policy, but it might have also been the most important policy that will allow actual kind of, maybe let's say, economic libertarianism to come after. Because once you take, let's say, troops out of a different country, it might give you kind of more chance to focus on your own country, I guess was his argument.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. This is the rule that Murray Rothbard had until his death in 1995. Always go for the most anti-war candidate, whether they're Republican or Democrat or where they are on
Who's the quote?
Murray Rothbard.
Who is he?
So he's on that. I'm not sure if you can see him there. He's the one. The Australian flag's blocking him. He's the one in the black there. Black picture there.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so he wrote Man, Economy and State, which is another Austrian economics treatise based on human action and praxeology. And then he wrote a supplementary text called Power and Market, which made the case for anarcho-capitalism, like exploring, do you need a state for a economy and society to function. But he was also involved in all the political movements from the 60s. He was involved in the flower power hippie anti-war movements, and because they were anti-war at the time. But by the 90s, he ended up supporting Pat Buchanan and David Duke because they were anti-war.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you'd probably have to say, though, all in all, they've been profoundly unsuccessful in trying to get limited government intervention in the market, wouldn't you say?
Well, this is the thing about libertarianism trying to achieve what libertopia. I don't think it's ever going to
Gold.
happen, but you've got to basically try and see where the freedoms are being eroded significantly at the time, because if people notice that this is a significant encroachment on liberty and freedom, it's easier to convince them to change course. And so, for example, like I mentioned, the SJW is taking over the college campuses. Obviously, their threat to freedom was freedom of speech, and obviously the United States has the First Amendment. There's those polls which a lot of millennials, my generation. Are you millennial or a Zoomer?
I always get mixed up, but I could be either one. I'm 1998.
You're the same age as Nick Fuentes, so you just fall on the Zoomer spectrum. So they were basically the ones pushing this push to basically deconstruct society, the millennials, with their imagined patriarchies and whatever systems of oppression and that. And of course, the only way to do that, they believed, was through government intervention, of course, speech codes. I mentioned the First Amendment in the United States. A lot of them got universities to have speech codes. And obviously, we've seen since then the deplatforming movement. You mentioned PayPal. They've deplatformed people for wrongthink. So have many of the credit card payment processes, the banks, social media. And we've also seen if you express the wrong opinions, or maybe just not in the most diplomatic fashion, you can lose your job and livelihood. You can even get evicted.
Well, Tommy Robinson was one guy who had his PayPal suspended. Is that right?
He was one of many, yes.
One of many. And I noticed he got, I think I went through some of your, for those who don't know, the Unshackled does a bunch of awards every year. I think 2018, maybe he got the Straight White Male Award.
Yeah.
Tommy Robinson. But that's been a really interesting case, because one of our friends, Joel Jamal, just got like a 60-day ban from posting on Facebook just for posts at the end of last year, which just mentioned Tommy Robinson. And I think just putting his name in a post, Facebook picks up the algorithm and gives you a strike or gives you a ban straight away. Like, you're not even allowed to talk about that guy.
Yeah, it's the same with Blair Cottrell here in Australia. That's how I lost my Facebook profile, because I was reporting on his appeal trial, appealing his conviction under Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, another hate speech law threat to freedom. And because I simply reported on that, mentioned his name, showed his face, Facebook went through all of that and gave me a strike for all of them, and eventually disabled my account and deleted my page.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. For those people who kind of aren't familiar, why don't you kind of give an introduction to Blair? You're more familiar with him than I am. And then why you got so interested in covering his appeal case?
Well, to give you a brief rundown of his activism, he was pretty much the figurehead of the United Patriots Front, which burst onto, well, not just the national scene, but the international scene as well, when they led the demonstrations and protests against the construction or proposed construction of a mosque in the rural Victorian city of Bendigo. And when they started those protests, that's also when we saw Antifa in Australia. That's when they got started on the streets, as well as a reactionary movement. And if you can still watch Blair's speeches on YouTube. He's not censored from that there, but he's a very emotive, passionate speaker, very eloquent, and so he captivates and engages a lot of people. He he didn't really seek out leadership. People attending those rallies basically saw him as the figurehead, and obviously
He's a big dude as well. He looks like
yeah, he is
like a Viking charge into your village.
And he's had a checkered past, which made him prime for the media to attack him. He spent time in prison in his late teens for stalking, arson, and property damage after a relationship breakup. And there are quite a number of screenshots around that purport him to make statements praising Hitler and Nazism. He has read Mein Kampf, but that doesn't automatically make you a Nazi.
I'm fully planning on reading it in the same way I've read the Communist Manifesto. Like,
yeah, you're not a communist.
Yeah, no.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So obviously, with the way that the media works, they always dug up those alleged, because the thing with screenshots on social media, that anyone can make a fake account and
edit something tool and change.
Yeah. Yeah. Blair's denied that he's made those statements, but of course, the mainstream media, they never get the truth get in the way of a good a good slander. And so and it was basically from Antifa activists and lefties on Twitter harassing mainstream media journalists that they ended up just referring to him as a convicted criminal neo-Nazi. They basically led all of their headlines with that. And the appeal trial that I covered during their activism at the city of Bendigo, to use Blair's words himself, they wanted to create an absurd video to promote one of their upcoming rallies, and they beheaded a dummy outside the Bendigo City Council building, and it was complete with, when they cut it off, there was fake blood that came out. They were dressed in Middle Eastern attire, like sheikhs and that. And Blair says we're going to give you a taste of some of the cultural enrichment. The video was played repeatedly during the appeal trial that I sat in. It is quite a very I would say in your face video. The track that's over it, you can see how a sort of normie might be intimidated by it, but of course I don't believe that's grounds to violate someone's free speech. And so he and the two other United Patriots Front members who appeared in that video, Neil Erickson and Christopher Shortus, in September 2017, they were found guilty under Section 25, Subsection 2 of Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, which makes it unlawful to incite contempt, revulsion, or severe ridicule on a class of persons. Obviously, the act is about race or religion.
Now, I think I would fully agree with you in that you shouldn't if you cut the head off a dummy and pretend to be a Muslim, that's not something you should go to jail for. In the same way, I don't think people who say F white men should go to jail, although I might suggest that potentially both aren't very nice. But so then he did through the appeal. So he appealed that conviction and then ultimately lost that, right?
Yes. So the original punishment, $2,000 fine and a conviction stood, which it seems pretty, because it is a criminal section of the Act, you can actually go to jail for 6 months.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so he's got a criminal conviction based on that beheading that mock dummy.
Right. And this is something I did want to discuss because I haven't delved too much into it, but so in terms of the strands of nationalism, I previously to about like a year ago, thought that nationalism was like, you kind of learn about the Anzacs and you love barbecues and like Australia and stuff like that, which I guess it is in a range of senses. But then people have also been telling me about this divide between civic nationalism and ethno-nationalism. Do you want to give a breakdown on how Blair kind of fits into that?
Well, I'd start by saying, obviously, in the Australian context, there's civic nationalism and white nationalism, because Australia was settled by the British white settlers. But I'd say now there's probably 3 strands of nationalism. There's civic nationalism.
Nationalism is what?
Civic nationalism is that as long as immigrants, no matter what skin color, they integrate, respect our laws, culture, then anyone's welcome. Basically that Australia is the land of that opportunity. As long as you come here and integrate, then you're welcome. And then there is white nationalism, which is that, and it's part of ethno-nationalism, is that ethno-nationalists believe that there are differences between races and ethnic groups, and it leads to a much more cohesive society if each race or ethnic group lives in their own separate state or area. It's not white supremacy or racism. It's because they believe that other nations should be like that as well. They don't believe, for example, they oppose neoconservatism, for example. Like, why should we tell the people in the Middle East how they should live? And they point to, obviously, the multicultural failure in Europe, and they say it's not because simply these immigrants haven't integrated. It's because you've got all of these different nation of tribes emerging, and that's the reason why you're getting this dysfunction in Europe. Then there is also a new strand, a sort of in between strand called white majoritarianism, which is because some white nationalists or ethno-nationalists, they take quite a hardline position that all the non-whites should be deported. That sometimes they set out a practical way how that would be achieved. A lot of those types, they're what you call LARPers. So basically people online who think they're really edgy by saying, yeah, let's just kick them all out. White majoritarianism is that, obviously, in a somewhat global interconnected world, there's going to be immigration of different races between countries. But to preserve a nation such as Australia or the US or Canada, the UK as a whole, you still need to maintain a white majority. That should be your aim, so that those non-white immigrants, they are forced to assimilate. There's not an incentive for them to create their own ghettos and have their own type of colonies.
What do you think is the difference between what do you think are the characteristics of white people that would lead one to support a majority white or white kind of only form of nationalism?
You're asking me to speak for other people.
Right. Well,
I can give an idea. They obviously look at Western nations, the such as, well, the British Empire, for example. It conquered most of the world. I mean, we are a former British colony, as is the United States, Australia and Canada, New Zealand, where we still have a constitutional monarchy. You look at how India has, even though they have independence now, that the British rule has been a force for good for them. So they basically look at the achievements of the British, the Anglo-Saxon people, and obviously they believe that a country that is primarily influenced by those ideas and by those people is what's best for those nations which already have a white Anglo-Saxon majority. That's their position. But there's also I know that there's a counter argument to that has been that if you're why are you relying so much on your ancestors' achievements? If you want to save your nation or make your nation better, do it yourself. Don't just be proud of people all the way down the generational lines, which I can see that as well. But of course, it's good to be proud of your country and your heritage, and putting those what I just said with it's silly to take credit for other people's achievements. That the burden is on you in the current generation to not ruin what other people built.
Mm, mm. Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I asked was because I wanted to. I have asked, tried to organise an interview with Blair, but it hasn't quite worked out yet. Blair is part of like the Lad Society, right? Well, our friend Samrat tried to join, and upon finding out that he was a bit too black to meet the requirements, he had a look at the Proud Boys. But is when media outlets say, for example, that someone like Blair would Blair consider himself a white nationalist?
Or you could ask him. Hopefully, one day you can ask him yourself. Again, I'm speaking for somebody else. I'd sort of say he might fall in between the white majoritarian and white nationalist levels there, because he has said that he doesn't hate anyone of any race. This is what he said on my show previously, that he doesn't go down the street and like greasy eye the Asians or Indians or whatever, but he wants to preserve Australia as it has been for 200 plus years, which it was obviously founded as a European white British settlement.
Well, in terms of, just as an interesting point, I know I don't want to try and box you in as the voice piece for these guys, but it is kind of interesting as a thought that just came into my mind in terms of keeping the idea of keeping racial purity in different countries. Because if they say, well, we leave the Middle East alone, it is. I don't know if I don't think it's irrelevant potentially that white people have been here like 300 years or 250 years or something. Maybe the Aboriginals want to keep racial purity. But anyway, I appreciate that talk, and it's one that I've kind of been, I would say, always nervous about, because you see the kind of like racial undertones in like different corners of the internet.
Yeah. And I, during my beginnings at the Unshackled, had probably the same position as you, but as you progress in this, because we're in the alt media, if we wanted to basically play it safe, we would be trying to get on the mainstream media. But it's a process, because there is such a negative perception and image of people like Blair and the United Patriots Front. Like, I didn't interview Blair for the first time until about 2 years into starting the Unshackled, because it was just sort of, it's this this a good idea, or will I get backlash for that? But I got to the stage now where I was just like, I don't care about that sort of optical stuff anymore.
Mm. Well, I like some people, would say I'm maybe delusional, but I like the idea of being able to say, like, we can make funny, casual, racist jokes about our difference in skin color, but like fundamentally, it doesn't mean anything. That's what I like to believe. But then you do also, in some senses, see a kind of, you're not really allowed to for white people, but for a lot of other races, they're kind of, like in terms of black people voting for Obama because he's black, right? You can imagine the backlash if someone came out and said, yeah, I'm voting for Trump because he's white. And I know that, the social justice types would say, well, every president like previously has been white. So, we're voting for a change. But a lot of it was voting for skin color. A lot of the Yang gang, when I talk to some of my Asian friends, like, yeah, I like Andrew Yang because it's good to see a yellow face in the political scene, right? In the presidential race or on that debate stage. And you can see in some instances people like just going for their own race in the same way that they might go for their local footy team or something. And it's not necessarily like, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, when you start being mean or looking down on people or up on people in certain ways, then I don't think it's, my instinct is that that's not good. But like the idea of going for your own race, like I try not to do it, but when I see Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis tearing up the NBA, these two white kids, there is a part of me that's like, the white man can jump. But what do you think about that?
I know that the intellectual dark web type personalities such as Dave Rubin and Claire Lehman and Sam Harris, they rail against identity politics. And when they talk about that, they're mainly talking about the left's intersectionality hierarchy, which I just talked about before, because it does restrain speech, whether it be just through civil society or even the more extreme methods through criminal codes. But they also make the point of condemning the ethno-nationalists or the alt-right, whatever they decide to call them, saying that we should reject identity politics from the left and the right. But what you just said there is true, that there is a natural, people still have a natural attachment to the tribe, whether it be race or gender or other attributes, sexuality, anything like that. And that's a point that the ethno-nationalists make to sort of further their thing. See, you might want to believe in this multicultural utopia, but you just have to look at just how people in the end revert. But of course, it's not always the case that obviously there were a lot of black people who voted for Obama because he was black. But we saw that Hillary Clinton vote for me because I'm a woman. That didn't work out too well. 52% of white women voted for Trump. And I remember a quote stands out to me because there was a point in the campaign where Hillary Clinton dragged out Bill's old Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. I'm not sure if you know much about her. She was the Secretary of State who was asked in a 60 Minutes interview that the sanctions against Iraq have led to the death of 500,000 Iraqi children. Is the price worth it? And Madeleine Albright said that, oh yeah, the price is worth it. Her slogan is, there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. Based on what she said there's a special place in hell for Madeleine Albright. She's sadly still alive. Wow. But Hillary Clinton dragged her out to say that quote. And there was a good response from Susan Sarandon, of all people. She's probably one of the biggest Hollywood socialists. She backed Bernie Sanders and said, I don't vote with my vagina. And she was one of the Bernie or bust people. She hated Hillary Clinton.
Mm. Well, there is a sense in which like the media, and I think they've got it wrong a lot. And I wonder what you think about this. You would probably have to think about this in terms of this weird abstract idea of setting the parameters of like the public discussion. And the reason why, now I think the media has mainly got it wrong recently in the past few years by placing, let's say, for example, Donald Trump outside the scope for acceptable public discussion. And the kind of tactic to kind of beat Trump was to make Trump support or supporting Trump in public so toxic that you pay like a range of social consequences for it. And so they put Trump outside the scope, but obviously Trump wasn't, actually outside the scope. But do you think that the media has like a role to have like this kind of parameters on social discussion? Like, would you put race and politics like inside or outside it? Like, I think I would probably like, I don't know that much about it, so I can't really say it, but there's an instinct to me which might say like race and politics maybe sits outside it in the same way like government ownership of like all of the economy should be outside it, but also it's not, right? Because you get like socialists are consistently, let's say, in the public dialogue. And so it is very one-sided. And so I know people would have sympathy for the right wing side of that. But what do you think?
I'm a free speech absolutist. So I think nothing is off limits, even because offense is, I'm sure you've heard this before, offense is taken, not given. And these days people are offended by a whole bunch of different things. Sometimes it is innocuous thing they're offended by. Sometimes it is genuinely things that most people would consider grotesque. But of course, you don't have to listen and amplify opinions that you don't like, or views or theories that you find abhorrent. And this applies to both the left and the right. So, for example, Clementine Ford, most people accept that she's being absurdist when she says "kill all men." Otherwise, she'd have to kill her husband and her son, which she's clearly not going to do that.
So do you not get like a lawsuit against her for saying something like that?
Well, there was an interesting case that it was the end of last year when Elon, this was in the US, not Australia. Elon Musk, he tried to be the hero with the Thai cave rescue. And one of the rescue crew basically slapped him down and said he was an idiot. And then Elon Musk on Twitter called him a pedophile, which is like, that's pretty, that's like the worst thing you can call somebody. But during the defamation trial, the jury didn't find that Elon Musk defamed him because obviously nobody would take what Elon Musk said seriously, this baseless accusation.
Right. Right. So you think,
get what I mean?
Yeah. So if people going around say "kill all men" or "F white men," that's fine. But if you say something like, oh, I don't know, but there have been people who, I don't know about the lawsuits, to be honest, but I just feel like if the offense is the grounds or the criteria on which you convict somebody, then there's a range of, it seems like, speech which is going unchallenged.
Well, I'll give you another example. When Mona Ethaway, that Egyptian-American feminist, said on Q&A, Hamas men must we kill to defeat the patriarchy? And she said she didn't. She said it on the ABC, but it's also in her book. She proposed killing 1 million men. So she's basically advocating a final solution to the patriarchy problem, if you like. That is, given that she's written it down as sort of a serious, like, it's not an absurdist thing. She's written it down in a book to sort of maybe to defeat the patriarchy, because it was a chapter about feminism and political violence. I definitely think that is a way to direct incitement to violence.
Yeah, for sure. one of the other things I find is that the Antifa people, it's like, if you really wanted to have like a, a, a street fight between like hard left people and hard right people, I think hard right people would win basically every day of the week. Just from
Yeah,
judging.
that's why they always, when they counter protest, because they started counter protesting United Patriots Front rallies, but then they got they felt more and more empowered to disrupt speaking and other demonstrations. Like they even protested Nigel Farage's Melbourne talk and Dr. Jordan Peterson's Melbourne talk. They even those more establishment dissident right figures, the campaign against racism and fascism still felt the need to protest to say how bad they thought Nigel Farage and Jordan Peterson were.
Yeah, it's a weird situation, man. What do you think? So tell us a bit more about the differentiation between like Wilms Front and Unshackled, and where you've taken your alternative media career these days.
Well, I had a show before Wilms Front called the Unshackled Waves, which I launched in November 2016 because, well, back then I was completely new to all of this. I had the humble beginning in the bedroom, and so I was just basically started with the basic web and hosting package on a WordPress blog in September, then moved to a audio only podcast in November. And because it was the Unshackled, that was sort of the brand at the time. So the podcast was not about me. I co-hosted for a while with the person I founded it with, Suka Fernando. Eventually, it sort of morphed into just sort of my own show, and this was years down the track. And what I picked up from other successful podcasters and streamers and that is, for your following to become more loyal, to get those repeat listeners, and that you have to have a greater relationship with the audience. And so well, the Unshackled Waves, it was still in podcast, even though I created the video version, it was still pre-recorded. There was not any viewer interaction. And so with Wilms Front, it obviously had my name in it. There's a live chat. It's a lot more about me interacting with the audience as well, which is, it's worked out really well in that regard. I basically know all of the regulars in the chat and the super chatters as well. And so I've basically got to the stage now, not just with Wilms Front, but with the other shows, the Unshackled Producers, the Uncuckables, and Trad Tasman Talk, where we have this loyal regular following. They don't watch Sky After Dark. They watch either my show or XYZ Live or D Beltran Live or Dusty Bogan. So we've really created this this community here who enjoy our content. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. One of the things I have noticed from you guys is, I mean, even on like the Telegram chats and stuff, as well as how engaged you guys are with the people who are engaging with your content. It's definitely something we need to work on a lot. But I mean, it's all part of the game, you know, like being new and learning these things. I mean, that's one of the things I like talking to you for. I mean, you helped me even like this week trying to help me out my home setup. We always appreciate you.
I didn't help you with that home setup. Just to be clear, that kitchen setup, that was your idea.
That would be much cleaner, maybe, if you. Well, anyway, I think that's basically going to wrap us up. Do you have anything you'd like to say, and also shout out what social medias do you want to promote, or potentially all of them, where people can catch you?
Yeah, so obviously the Unshackled.net as a news website still publishes regular content, and it also serves as a hub for all our Unshackled productions. I have my own website, timwilms.com, which has got a link to all of my social media and where you can listen and tune in to the show. So my YouTube channel is, I've been able to get one of those personal YouTube addresses. So it's youtube.com/c/Tim Wilms.
Oh, nice. I should get one of them.
Mm.
Well, if you go on the Unshackled website, I think you'll find some written articles from both myself and Alexander on there, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, because Alex, when he was away in China, where he was being brainwashed by the CCP, I'm being antagonistic, just joking. But because he couldn't participate in any of your shows, he just wrote some articles. But this is another thing with because obviously we are in the coronavirus pandemic. You and your brothers only used to do in-person podcasts and episodes. You didn't like to use Skype or Zoom, but now you're forced to.
Well, it has helped us because it means we can like connect with people that we wouldn't have potentially connected with before. And it hopefully down the line we can start talking to more people in different countries. Maybe like there's definitely some American people I'd love to connect with. That's going to come when the channel grows. You know, it's hard to say. Well, I mean, you definitely make the pitch and say, hey, look, we got a few subscribers. Do you want to come on? But eventually there will be so many. We'll be so big that they can't not do it.
You'll get there. You've created your Telegram presence now, so you're getting there.
And probably Denier is more active promoting our stuff than we are, but I'll get on there again. Anyway, if you like the interview, I always end up dribbling at the end. It's a staple of a Carnage House videos that the ending takes about 5 minutes. But like and subscribe if you like the content in the interview. Tell us what you thought in the comments. Subscribe, follow us on Instagram, Facebook. If you really like us, you can give us some money on Patreon, little as $1 a month to support these guys. But anyway, we got a bunch more interviews coming down the pipe, a bunch more good stuff. We're on the way up. We're making rock stars out here. Thanks for coming on, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you all soon.